The Supreme Court could decide whether it will hear a request by President Trump to decide whether some of his tariffs are legal. The White House has asked justices to quickly intervene, marking a last-ditch effort by the administration to salvage Trump's trade policy after a federal court ruled against it. Today, Treasury Secretary But gave new details about what would happen to the billions of dollars in tariff revenue the U.S. has collected if the court rules against Trump.
So we would have to give a refund on about half the tariffs, which would be terrible for the Treasury.
And you're prepared to give those refunds?
Well, I mean, there's no be prepared. If the court says it, we'd have to do it.
Joining us right now to discuss defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Shan Wu. Shan, great to see you. It's been too long.
Good to see you.
All right, so 2 federal courts, 10 federal judges have decided Trump's tariff policy is not legal. So you heard But there talking about it would be terrible to have to give, refund about half of the intake. What do you see potentially happening? Would that be the goal as a result of this ruling?
Well, it's a terribly complicated problem, really unprecedented. I mean, the size of the amount that has been deemed to be illegal at this point is just enormous. And I think the logistics are just impossibly complicated here. And it's fine for Secretary But to say, no question about being prepared, we just got to do it. But there's a question, how are you going to prepare for that? I mean, how are you going to calculate these? I mean, I think it's a little bit interesting that he calls it potentially a rebate, because a rebate, after all, it's just a promotional refund or discount, rather. And here's the problem. What are you discounting off of, right? I mean, if you have a 100% increase and they say, I'm going to give you a 50% discount, yay, great. But you're setting what the original increase is. And the tariff percentages, of course, are all over the place. And you have to decide what's the baseline that you're trying to get back to. So it's a terribly complicated problem and really indicates legally why it would have been better just to stop them from going into effect until the litigation was concluded, probably ultimately at the Supreme Court.
Oh, interesting. So during the Biden administration, conservative justices relied on something called the major questions doctrine to strike down several of his policies. Could Trump also be subject to this if the justices do, take up this case further?
It could be. I mean, this Supreme Court very much has, at least the conservative majority, has proven to be a friend of expanding presidential power. So there's an aspect in which you could say, well, they're a little bit more likely to allow the president to engage in these issues rather than having the courts decide it rather than the executive. But on the other hand, a problem for the Trump administration is it's so black and white that the statute they tried to use does not specifically talk about using tariffs to address the emergency that he claims that exists. So I think it's a hard question for the Supreme Court. I mean, they're definitely a friend to an expanded executive power, but this is also a very black and white legal question, at least I think so.
Today, the president's National Economic Council director, Kevin Hassett, said there are other ways to implement tariffs if the Supreme Court rules against them, suggesting something called Section 232 could be used. Walk us through what that is, whether that would be applied potentially to these tariffs that Trump imposed on just about every nation.
Yeah, there are other methods they could use to do the tariffs. I mean, they can even use some of the sort of anti-dumping, countervailing duties type of issues, which I think he's alluding to here. The question really always with the Trump administration is this one of process. There may be many, many different statutory vehicles that a president can use to accomplish this type of economic leverage, to balance the playing field more favorably for the U.S., or if his real motive is just to negotiate certain things through economic leverage, that's all possible. But the process question is always central for the Trump administration, and they don't want to use it. So whatever they want to do, Section 232 or something else that they come up with legally, the issue is they have to first get it approved. That's the best thing for the country, is not to just willy-nilly start trying different things that cause this huge ripple cascade of economic effects, and only then do you litigate it later and then try to figure out, how do you put that genie back in the bottle.
And then, finally, I do want to ask you about, D.C. suing Trump for sending National Guard troops into the city without consent from local leaders. A federal judge recently ruled that Trump broke the law when he sent National Guard troops into Los Angeles. Could it be the same type of challenge here in D.C., which is a federal city?
It is the same type of challenge. There are some differences. The California one, where they prevailed because the governor had not invited the Guard to come in, and because they violated the Posse Comitatus Act, established back in the Rutherford presidency, which really was meant to prevent the Union Army, it expands to all armed forces now, from occupying the Confederate states. And that's why it says that you can't have the armed forces doing civil law enforcement, because that's for the states and the police. That's very much exactly the same issue going on here, with one important difference, which is D.C., because it's a federal city, as you pointed out, there's no governor equivalent to invite or not invite the Guard in. And President Trump, as any president, does have that kind of control over the Guard. But the fact that he can order the Guard in that sense, because it's D.C., does not mean that the Guard can do unconstitutional things. And that's the subject of the lawsuit, which is to say you can't use them as police substitutes. First of all, they're not even trained to do that. Terrible idea. But if you're using them in domestic law enforcement, then you would still be violating the Constitution. And the other aspects of the suit are taking on the sort of arbitrary, capricious notion, which really goes to the sort of questionable statistics that the administration is citing and saying that there is an uptick in crime. It's a pretty strong argument that there's not an uptick in crime.
All right, Shan Wu, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Okay, good to see you.
You as well. All right, straight ahead. Strong reaction from Democrats this weekend over a social media post from the president. They say implies the administration is going to war against sanctuary cities.